The red sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the broken landscape as Captain Jake Morrison moved through the ruins of what used to be a thriving mining colony. The air tasted of metal and smoke, and the ground beneath his boots crunched with debris from the latest Vrex bombing run. His squad of 5 soldiers followed behind him, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning for any sign of the insectoid enemies that had been hunting them for weeks. Jake had been leading patrol missions on this planet for 3 months now, ever since the Vrex Empire decided they wanted the rare minerals buried deep in the planet's core. The multi-species coalition that had been defending the colony was losing badly. Every day brought news of another outpost falling, another group of defenders forced to retreat. The humans were just one small part of the coalition, but they fought with a stubbornness that impressed their alien allies. The patrol was supposed to be routine. Check the outer perimeter, look for Vrex scouts, and report back to base. Nothing special. Jake had done this same route dozens of times before. But as they moved past a collapsed defense barrier made of twisted metal and concrete, something caught his eye. A splash of blue-green liquid on the ground, still wet, still fresh. He held up his hand, signaling his squad to stop. Sergeant Lisa Grant moved up beside him, her rifle raised. She was a good soldier, tough and reliable, but she sometimes questioned orders when she thought they were too dangerous. Private Carlos Martinez, their medic, crouched behind a piece of rubble, his medical kit already in his hands. The other 3 soldiers, Rodriguez, Kim, and Davis, spread out to form a defensive circle. Jake followed the trail of blue-green fluid around the barrier. What he found there made him stop in his tracks. A Thylorian warrior lay crumpled against the concrete. Her forearms twisted at strange angles, her chitinous exoskeleton cracked and leaking. Her large compound eyes flickered weakly as she struggled. To stay conscious, Thylorians were one of the most feared warrior species in the galaxy. They stood 7 feet tall, had natural armor that could stop small arms fire, and could fight with weapons in all 4 hands at once. This one wore the dark blue uniform of the Thylorian Defense Corps, and Jake could see the rank insignia that marked her as a senior warrior. Her name tag read Zara in both Thylorian script and Standard Galactic, but right now, she looked nothing like the fearsome warrior her species was known for. She looked broken, abandoned, dying. Jake knelt beside her, pulling out his medical scanner. The device beeped softly as it analyzed her condition. 3 broken limbs, internal bleeding, severe dehydration, and what looked like plasma burns across her chest and back. Any human with these injuries would have been dead hours ago. "Captain," Lisa whispered, "we need to move. This area isn't secure." Jake ignored her, studying the scanner readings. Zara's breathing was shallow and rapid, her body temperature dropping. She was going into shock, and without medical attention she would be dead within the hour. "Where's her unit?" Carlos asked, checking the area around them. Jake looked at the drag marks in the dirt, the scattered equipment, the signs of a hasty retreat. It was clear what had happened. The Thylorian forces had been pushed back by a Vrex advance, and they had left their wounded behind. It was their way, their ancient tradition. Warriors who couldn't keep up were abandoned to die with honor rather than slow down the unit. "They left her," Jake said quietly. Lisa moved closer, her weapon still raised. "Captain, we can't stay here. The Vrex patrol routes take them through this area every 20 minutes. Jake looked down at Zara. Her eyes had closed, but he could still see the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was fighting to stay alive, even though her own people had given up on her. "Sir," Rodriguez called from his position, "I've got movement." "On the horizon, looks like Vrex scouts." Jake made his decision. He handed his rifle to Carlos and carefully slid his arms under Zara's body. She was lighter than he expected, maybe 150 pounds despite her height. Her exoskeleton was warm to the touch, and he could feel her weak pulse through the cracks in her armor. "What are you doing?" Lisa asked, her voice sharp with concern. "We're taking her with us," Jake said, adjusting his grip to support her broken limbs. "Captain, she's not our species. She's not even our ally anymore. Her own people left her to die." Jake looked at his sergeant. then at the rest of his squad. They were all staring at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. But he thought about the human military code that had been drilled into him since basic training. Leave no one behind. It didn't say leave no human behind. It said leave no one behind. That's exactly why we're not leaving her, Jake said. Because we're human, and humans don't abandon their wounded. Carlos slung both rifles across his back and pulled out his medical kit. I'll try to stabilize her while we move, but I don't know anything about Thylorian medicine. Then we'll figure it out as we go. Jake replied. The journey back to the human medical facility was 15 miles through enemy territory. Jake knew it would be dangerous, maybe impossible. But as he looked down at Zara's unconscious face, he also knew he couldn't leave her behind. Not when there was still a chance to save her. Lisa shook her head but took point position. You're crazy, Captain. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Rodriguez, take rear guard. Kim and Davis, flanking positions. Carlos, stay close to the captain in case she needs medical attention. As they began to move, Jake felt the weight of Zara's body in his arms. She was completely helpless, completely dependent on them for survival. Her own people had written her off, decided she was more burden than soldier. But Jake had seen something in her eyes before she lost consciousness. She was still fighting, still trying to live. The red sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, Jake could see the lights of Rex patrols moving across the landscape. It was going to be a long night, and he wasn't sure they would all make it back alive, but he was sure of one thing. They weren't leaving. Anyone behind? Not today, not ever. That's what made them human. The first mile was the hardest. Jake's arms burned from carrying Zara's weight, and every step sent jolts of pain through his back and shoulders. The Thylorian warrior drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes making soft clicking sounds that Carlos said might be her way of crying out in pain. Her blue-green blood had soaked through Jake's uniform, leaving dark stains across his chest. Lisa led the squad through the ruins of an old processing plant, using the twisted metal structures as cover from the Vrex patrols that swept the area every 20 minutes. The insectoid enemies moved in groups of 6, their chittering voices carrying across the wasteland as they searched for survivors to capture or kill. Jake had to stop twice when Zara's breathing became so shallow that Carlos thought she might be dying. Her pulses getting weaker, Carlos whispered as he checked her vital signs behind a fallen concrete wall. I've given her what painkillers I can, but I don't know if human medicine works on Thylorian biology. Jake looked down at Zara's face. Her compound eyes were closed, but he could see them moving beneath her eyelids like she was dreaming. Or maybe having nightmares. Her forearms hung limp, and the cracks in her exoskeleton seemed to be getting wider. Keep trying, Jake said. She's tougher than she looks. Rodriguez called softly from his position. Captain, we've got Vrex movement. 200 meters north. They're heading this way. Jake felt his heart rate spike. If they were caught in the open carrying a wounded enemy, the Vrex would kill them all without hesitation. But if they left Zara behind, she would die anyway. There was no good choice. Can we go around them? Jake asked. Lisa studied the terrain through her scope. Not without adding 3 miles to our route. And that's 3 miles deeper into enemy territory. Jake made the call. We wait them out, find cover, and stay quiet. The squad moved into the shadows of a collapsed building, pressing themselves against the cold concrete walls. Jake held Zara close to his chest, trying to muffle any sounds she might make. Her breathing was ragged, and he could feel her body trembling with fever. The Vrex patrol passed within 50 meters of their hiding spot. Jake could see their black carapaces gleaming in the moonlight, their multiple eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of life. One of them stopped directly in front of their building, its head tilted as if it had heard something. Jake held his breath. Zara stirred in his arms, her eyes opening slightly. She saw the Vrex through a gap in the wall and started to tense up, maybe trying to reach for a weapon that wasn't there. Jake pressed his hand gently over her mouth, meeting her gaze with his own. He shook his head slowly, silently telling her to stay quiet. For a moment, human and Thylorian stared at each other. Jake saw intelligence in her large eyes, recognition that he was trying to save her life. She nodded slightly and relaxed against him, trusting him to keep her safe. The Vrex patrol moved on after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Jake waited until their chittering voices faded into the distance before allowing himself to breathe normally again. That was too close, Davis whispered. It's going to get worse, Lisa said. We're still 12 miles from base and dawn is coming. Will be easier to spot in daylight. Jake adjusted his grip on Zara and started walking again. His legs felt like lead and his back screamed in protest, but he kept moving. Every step was a step closer to safety, a step closer to saving her life. The second encounter with the enemy came 3 hours later. Jake's squad had been moving through a valley between two hills when Kim spotted Vrex soldiers setting up an ambush ahead. There were at least 10 of them, too many to fight, too well positioned to avoid. We're trapped, Rodriguez said. They've got the high ground on both sides. Jake looked at the terrain, calculating options. They could try to backtrack, but that would add hours to their journey, and Zara didn't have hours. They could try to fight, but carrying a wounded person would make Jake useless in combat. Give me your rifle, Jake said to Carlos. Captain, you can't fight while carrying her. I'm not planning to fight, I'm planning to run. Jake's plan was simple and desperate. Carlos would stay with Zara while Jake and the others created a distraction, drawing the Vrex away from the ambush point. Then Carlos would carry Zara through the gap while the squad provided covering fire. That's suicide, Lisa said flatly. It's our only chance, Jake replied. She dies if we don't try. The plan almost worked. Jake led Rodriguez, Kim, and Davis in a frontal assault on the Vrex position, their weapons blazing as they charged up the hill. The enemy soldiers took the bait, focusing their fire on the humans instead of watching for someone sneaking through the valley below. But Carlos was a medic, not a combat soldier. He stumbled while carrying Zara, falling hard and crying out in pain. The sound echoed through the valley, and suddenly half the Vrex were turning their weapons toward him. Jake saw what was happening and made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He dropped his rifle and sprinted down the hill, sliding on loose rocks and dodging plasma bolts that burned the air around him. He reached Carlos just as a Vrex soldier raised its weapon to fire. Jake threw himself between the enemy and the wounded Tylorian, taking a plasma burn across his left shoulder that felt like being branded with a hot iron. The pain was incredible. But he managed to grab Zara and keep running while his squad provided covering fire from above. They made it to cover, but barely. Jake's shoulder was a mess of burned flesh and torn fabric. Carlos was bleeding from where he had fallen, and Zara's condition was getting worse by the hour. Why? Lisa asked as Carlos bandaged Jake's wound. Why risk all our lives for one alien soldier? Jake looked down at Zara. She was conscious again, her large eyes focused on his face. He couldn't understand her language, but he didn't need to. The expression in her eyes was universal, gratitude, wonder, maybe even hope, because that's what humans do, Jake said. We don't leave people behind, even when they're not people like us. They still had 8 miles to go, and the sun was rising. But Jake was more determined than ever to get Zara home alive. The human medical facility looked like a miracle when Jake finally saw it through the early morning mist. It was nothing special, just a converted mining station with white walls and a red cross painted on the roof. But after 15 miles of carrying Zara through enemy territory, it might as well have been paradise. Jake's legs gave out as soon as they reached the entrance, and he collapsed to his knees, still holding the unconscious Dylorian warrior in his arms. Dr. Amy Foster came running out of the building, her white coat flapping behind her. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but she moved with the quick precision of someone who had spent years saving lives under impossible conditions. She took one look at Jake's burned shoulder and Zara's broken body and immediately started shouting orders to her staff. Get me 2 gurneys, stat. And someone call Lieutenant Johnson? Tell him we need security around the building. We've got an alien casualty. 2 nurses wheeled out the gurneys, but when they saw Zara, they stopped in their tracks. One of them, a young man named Peter, actually stepped backward. "Doctor, that's a Phylorian," he said, his voice shaking. "They're the enemy." Dr. Foster looked at Jake, who was trying to stand up despite his injuries. "Captain, what exactly happened out there?" "Her own people left her to die," Jake said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "She's a soldier, just like us. She deserves a chance." Dr. Foster studied Zara's still form, taking in the extent of her injuries. "Captain, I don't know the first thing about Phylorian anatomy. I could kill her trying to help her." Jake met her eyes, then we learn fast. The next few hours were chaos. Dr. Foster had to make decisions about treating an alien species she had never seen before, using medical knowledge that might not apply to Phylorian biology. She started by examining Zara's injuries, carefully cutting away the damaged parts of her exoskeleton to see what was underneath. "Her internal structure is completely different from humans," she told Jake as she worked. "Her heart, if that's what this is, has 6 chambers instead of 4. Her blood carries oxygen differently. Even her bones are made of some kind of cartilage metal composite." Jake watched from a chair nearby while a nurse treated his plasma burn. "Can you save her?" "I don't know, but I'm going to try." Dr. Foster worked with 3 nurses and Carlos, who had become the squad's expert on Phylorian medicine by necessity. They set up monitors to track Zara's vital signs, though they had to guess what the normal readings should be. They gave her fluids through and 4, hoping that the human saline solution wouldn't poison her alien blood. The biggest challenge was her broken bones. Phylorian skeletal structure was completely different from human bones. Where humans had solid bone, Phylorians had a flexible framework that could bend without breaking under normal circumstances. But Zara's injuries were far from normal. "It's like trying to repair a machine I've never seen before," Dr. Foster said, as she studied X-rays of Zara's damaged limbs. "I can see what's broken, but I don't know how it's supposed to work." Jake donated his own quarters to be converted into a recovery room for Zara. The medical staff moved in special equipment to monitor her condition, adjusted the temperature to match what their computers said Phylorians preferred, and even changed the lighting to a softer blue that would be easier on her compound eyes. While Dr. Foster worked to save Zara's life, Jake found himself thinking about why he had risked everything to help her. His squad had questioned his judgment, his superiors would probably discipline him, and for all he knew, Zara might die anyway. But every time he looked at her unconscious form, he knew he had made the right choice. On the second day, Zara developed a fever. Her body temperature spiked to dangerous levels, and she started having convulsions that shook her entire frame. Dr. Foster had no idea what was causing it or how to treat it. "Her immune system might be rejecting the human medications," she told Jake. "Or she might be having an allergic reaction to something in the air. I just don't know." Jake sat beside Zara's bed, watching her suffer. Her 4 arms twitched randomly, and she made small clicking sounds that might have been her way of crying out in pain. He felt helpless, watching someone he had risked everything to save slowly dying from complications he couldn't understand. "Talk to her," Dr. Foster suggested. "Even if she can't understand you, she might find the sound comforting." Jake didn't know what to say to an alien warrior who might not even speak his language. So he talked about simple things. He told her about Earth, about his hometown in Ohio, about why he had joined the military. He described the sunrise over Lake Erie, the smell of his mother's cooking, the sound of rain on the roof of his childhood home. Sometimes Zara seemed to listen. Her convulsions would slow down and her breathing would become more regular. Jake started to think that maybe she could understand him after all. On the 3rd day, Zara opened her eyes. Jake was sitting beside her bed, reading aloud from a book about Earth history, when he heard a soft clicking sound. He looked up to see her. Large compound eyes focused on his face. "Why?" she asked in heavily accented English. The word came out as a whisper through her speaking spiracles. Jake put down the book and leaned closer. "Because you're a soldier, and soldiers don't leave soldiers behind." Zara blinked slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "My people left." "Me, I know," Jake said. But you're not with your people anymore. You're with humans now. And humans don't abandon their wounded. Over the next few days, Zara's condition slowly improved. She learned to drink human water, eat modified human food, and communicate in basic English. She asked questions about human culture, about why they had saved her when her own people had left her to die. Jake spent hours talking with her, explaining human military traditions, human values, human stubbornness about never giving up on someone who could be saved. Zara listened with fascination, as if she was discovering a completely new way of looking at the world. "Your species is strange," she said one evening as Jake brought her dinner. "You risk everything for people you don't even know?" Jake smiled. "Maybe that's what makes us human." The story of Captain Jake Morrison carrying a wounded Thylorian warrior to safety spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. It started with a simple report that Jake's superior officer, Colonel Frank Bailey, sent to military headquarters about the unusual rescue mission. Within days, the report had been shared with the Galactic Council, and from there, it reached news networks on dozens of worlds. The first response came from the Thylorian High Command. Commander Thane Vex, who had been Zara's direct superior, sent an angry message to the human military leadership. Jake was called into Colonel Bailey's office to read the official complaint. "The human officer interfered with sacred Thylorian military traditions," the message read. Warrior Zara was left behind according to proper protocol. She had become a burden to the unit, and honor demanded that she face death with dignity rather than slow down her comrades. "This human's actions are an insult to our culture and our ancient ways." Colonel Bailey looked at Jake across his desk. "They want you court-martialed, Captain. They say you violated interspecies military agreements." Jake had expected this. "What does command say?" "Command says you save the life of an allied soldier, and that's what human soldiers do. But the Thylorians are threatening to pull their forces out of the coalition if we don't discipline you." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "So they want us to punish someone for saving a life? That's about the size of it." Colonel Bailey leaned back in his chair. "But here's the thing, Captain. The story isn't staying quiet. Someone leaked it to the galactic media, and now everyone knows what you did." The media coverage was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Reporters from 20 different species wanted to interview him, asking questions about human military culture and why he had risked his life for an alien soldier. Jake tried to avoid most of them, but the questions kept coming. "Why did you carry her when her own people left her behind?" asked a reporter from the Centauri News Network. "Because it was the right thing to do," Jake answered. "She was a soldier, and soldiers don't leave soldiers behind." "But she wasn't human. She wasn't even technically your ally anymore." Jake looked directly into the camera. "She was hurt and needed help. That's all that mattered." The interview was broadcast across the galaxy, and the response was immediate. On Thylos Prime, the Thylorian homeworld, young warriors began questioning their ancient traditions. Social media platforms buzzed with debates about the wisdom of leaving wounded comrades behind. A group of junior Thylorian officers published an open letter challenging the old ways. "We have watched the human carry our warrior to safety," they wrote. "We have seen him risk his life for someone who was not of his species, not of his culture, not even of his world. This is not weakness. This is strength we have forgotten." The letter caused a massive controversy on Thylos Prime. Traditional warriors called the young officers traitors and cowards. But public opinion was shifting, especially among the younger generation who had grown up with stories of human heroism. Zara herself became a symbol of this cultural change. As she recovered in the human medical facility, she gave interviews to Thylorian media, speaking about her experience and what she had learned about human culture. "I expected to die alone in the dirt," she told a reporter from the Thylorian Broadcasting Corporation. "My own people had written me off as a burden. But this human, this Jake Morrison, he saw something different. He saw a life worth saving." The interviewer asked her about the traditional Thylorian view that wounded warriors should die with honor rather than burden their units. "I thought I understood honor," Zara replied. I thought honor meant accepting death when you became weak. But Jake taught me that real honor might be fighting for life, even when that life belongs to someone completely different from yourself. The controversy reached the highest levels of Thylorian government. The War Council met in emergency session to discuss the growing unrest among their military forces. Younger officers were refusing to follow the traditional protocol of leaving wounded behind. Some units had even started carrying human-style medical equipment to treat their injured commander. Vex found himself fighting a losing battle against changing attitudes. "We are warriors," he declared in a speech to the War Council. "We do not cling to life like weak creatures. We face death with dignity," but his words fell on deaf ears. The Council was receiving reports of improved morale among Thylorian forces, who had adopted human-style medical protocols. Units that refused to abandon their wounded were fighting harder, taking fewer casualties and showing greater loyalty to their officers. The change wasn't limited to the Thylorians. Other species in the Galactic Coalition began studying human military culture, particularly their doctrine of never leaving anyone behind. The insectoid Krell, who had always been practical about sacrificing individuals for the greater good, started questioning whether their approach was actually effective. Even some Vrex prisoners who had been captured during recent battles began asking about human treatment of wounded enemies. Word had spread that humans would provide medical care even to those who had been fighting against them. For a species that had been raised to fight to the death, this was a revolutionary concept. Jake found himself at the center of discussions he had never wanted to be part of. Military analysts from across the galaxy wanted to study human psychology, human culture, human military traditions. They wanted to understand what made humans willing to risk everything for people they didn't even know. "It's not complicated," Jake told a panel of military experts during a video conference. "We don't save people because it's useful to us. We save people because it's the right thing to do. That's what makes us human." The panel included representatives from 6 different species, and they all seemed fascinated by this simple explanation. "But surely there must be tactical advantages to this approach," suggested a Krell military strategist. "Better unit cohesion, improved morale, reduced desertion rates." Jake shook his head. "Maybe those things happen, but that's not why we do it. We do it because every life has value, regardless of species or nationality or whether someone can fight anymore." As the weeks passed, Jake began to see the real impact of his actions. The Thylorian military was slowly changing its protocols, influenced by pressure from younger officers and public opinion. Other species were adopting similar changes, recognizing that caring for wounded soldiers actually made their forces stronger, not weaker. But perhaps the most important change was happening right in front of him. Zara was not just recovering from her physical injuries. She was becoming a bridge between 2 very different cultures, helping both species understand each other in ways that had never been possible before. 6 months after Jake Morrison carried Zara to safety, the war on Kepler 442b had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The human medical facility had been expanded into a joint command center, with officers from 12 different species working together in the same building. Zara walked through the corridors with confidence now, her injuries fully healed. Wearing the blue uniform of a Thylorian liaison officer, she found Jake in the communications room, studying reports from the front lines. He had been promoted to colonel after his actions became famous across the galaxy, though he still preferred to be called captain by his friends. The plasma burn on his shoulder had healed into a white scar that he wore like a badge of honor. "The morning briefing shows interesting numbers," Zara said, handing him a datapad. "Thylorian casualty rates have dropped 40% since we implemented the Morrison Doctrine." Jake smiled at the name. Military historians had started calling the new Thylorian policy of never abandoning wounded soldiers the Morrison Doctrine, though Jake had tried several times to get them to change it to something less embarrassing. The new protocol required every Thylorian unit to carry medical equipment and to evacuate wounded soldiers whenever possible. "How are your people adapting to the changes?" Jake asked. Better than expected. The younger warriors have embraced the new ways completely. Some of the older commanders still grumble, but even they cannot argue with the results. Zara sat down across from him, her four hands moving gracefully as she spoke. Unit cohesion has improved. Soldiers fight harder when they know their comrades. Will not abandon them, Jake nodded, looking at the data. What about the other species? The Krell have adopted similar protocols. The Centaurians are considering it. Even some of the smaller coalition members are changing their military doctrines. Zara paused, studying Jake's face. You realize what you have done, don't you? You have changed how half the galaxy thinks about warfare. Through the window they could see the planet's surface below. Where there had once been nothing but ruins and bomb craters, new construction was taking place. Human and Thylorian engineering teams worked side by side, rebuilding the mining colony with better defenses and improved living conditions. The Vrex Empire had been forced to change their tactics as well, faced with an increasingly unified resistance that refused to leave anyone behind. Many Vrex soldiers had begun surrendering rather than fighting to the death. The psychological impact of knowing that enemies would provide medical care had undermined the Vrex military's traditional fanaticism. We captured 15 Vrex soldiers yesterday, Jake said, reading from another report. They're being treated in the same medical facility where we saved you. Zara looked surprised. You treat enemy wounded the same as your own? Dr. Foster says a patient is a patient, regardless of which side they were fighting for. Jake set down the report. 3 of those Vrex soldiers have already agreed to provide intelligence about enemy positions. Apparently, being treated with dignity instead of being executed changes their perspective. The impact of human compassion had spread far beyond the battlefield. On Thylos Prime, the Thylorian government had established new veteran care programs, providing support for warriors who had been wounded in combat. The old tradition of abandoning disabled soldiers had been replaced with a comprehensive rehabilitation system. Young Thylorians were enlisting in the military at record numbers, inspired by stories of human heroism and the new promise that their service would be valued even if they were injured. The Thylorian Defense Corps reported higher morale and better performance across all units. Commander Vex requested a transfer to frontier duty, Zara mentioned casually. He said he could not adapt to the new methods. Jake remembered the angry messages Vex had sent about honoring traditional ways. How do you feel about that? I think some people cannot change, even when change would make them stronger. But most of my people have learned that strength is not about who you can defeat. It is about who you choose to save. A communication. Alert sounded, and Jake activated the holographic display. The face of Admiral Sarah Banks, the Coalition's Supreme Commander, appeared in the room. Colonel Morrison, we've received word that the Vrex Empire wants to open peace negotiations, she said. They're requesting that you and Officer Zara be part of the diplomatic team. Jake was stunned. Admiral, I'm a soldier, not a diplomat. You're the soldier who started a revolution by carrying one wounded warrior to safety. The Vrex specifically asked for you to be present. They want to understand human culture, human values, human methods. Zara leaned forward. What are their terms? Complete withdrawal from the Kepler system, reparations for damages, and a formal alliance agreement. They've seen what happens when species work together instead of abandoning each other, and they want to be part of it. After the communication ended, Jake and Zara sat in silence for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. A simple act of compassion had somehow led to the end of a war. Do you think it will work? Zara asked. The peace negotiations? Jake thought about everything that had changed since that day he found her bleeding behind a concrete barrier. I think people are capable of more than we give them credit for. 6 months ago, you thought honor meant dying alone. Now you're helping to rebuild a world. They walked to the observation deck, where they could see ships from dozens of different species working together in the space above the planet. Human transport vessels carried supplies alongside Thylorian warships. Krell medical ships provided aid to former enemies. Even some former Vrex colonies had sent humanitarian aid. You know what the strangest part is? Jake said, watching the bustling activity above them. I never set out to change the galaxy, I just saw someone who needed help. Zara placed one of her hands on his shoulder, a gesture she had learned from human culture. Perhaps that is what makes humans special. You do not think about changing the galaxy. You just do what is right and the galaxy changes around you. Jake smiled, remembering the weight of carrying her through enemy territory, the plasma burn on his shoulder, the long nights wondering if she would survive. It had all seemed so impossible then, so hopeless. My people have a new saying, Zara continued. A warrior who shows mercy to enemies shows true strength. We had forgotten that wisdom until you reminded us. As they stood together watching the ships above them, Jake realized that he had learned something too. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could have the biggest consequences. Sometimes carrying one person to safety could carry an entire galaxy toward peace.